Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar today. Just the usual housekeeping. If you're unable to hear or see the presentation at any point in time, please do raise your hand and we'll have a look into it straight away. Okay, let's get started. But before we do, I'll kickstart by introducing myself. So my name's Andrew Simpson and I'm the Senior Account Manager here at the Coal Authority. And today I'm also joined by three of our in-house experts. So we have Dr. Ian Watson, who is our Water Technical Lead. We've got Jim Bagnall, who is one of our project managers within the Environment team. And we have Andy Morritt, who is our Principal Contracts Manager. And these chaps will be walking you through one of our exciting pieces of work we've been involved in here at the Coal Authority later on as part of the case study discussion. So what are we going to be talking about today? So today's webinar is all about the Coal Authority's new Consultants Coal Mining Report and how this particular report should be used in replacement of the CON 29N. Now, our main goal during today's webinar will be to review the Consultants Report using a real-life case study, helping to draw attention to the importance of the report and the information within it. We'll also delve a little deeper into the report to give you an overview of what information and data you can expect to see. Now, please do feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar or equally at the end upon reflection, and we'll give you some contact details to do that. And we'll then look to respond to everybody in the way of supplying an FAQ document, which captures all of the questions that have been asked throughout the session. As I say, I will also look to supply with my contact details at the end of this webinar to enable you to contact me directly should you need to do so with any additional questions or requests, etc. Before we get started, I've had quite a few emails leading up to today around whether there'll be a recording made available or not. So to confirm, the webinar will most definitely be made available through both Ground Engineering themselves, and it will also be uploaded onto our YouTube page within the next couple of days. So do feel free to revisit the content at a later point if required. So let's take a quick look at our learning objectives for today. We're going to start off by running through what mining legacy looks like. We'll then discuss the challenges and risks with coal mining risk assessments, leading into the importance of full data analysis. We'll then discuss the challenges and risks with coal mining risk assessments, leading into the importance, covering off same content again there. We'll then run through some of the thought-provoking points around your own risk assessments before we finish off with looking at the Coal Authority's new Consultants Coal Mining Report, and in particular, how it can support you and your clients. Okay, so let's kick things off by looking at some of the numbers behind mining legacy. Now, mining legacy can mean different things to different people, and this is why I personally always find it particularly useful to put it into numbers, and there's a few interesting ones here for you on screen now. So most of us will already be aware that around 11% of the UK is occupied by the coalfield, but what you might not be aware of is what this looks like when we focus on particular elements of mining legacy. Now, as it stands, there's around 172,000 recorded mine entries on the coalfield, but we carry the view that this may only be around 1/3 of the total mine entries throughout the UK. Now, whilst a lot of the known activity is, of course, established from the 360,000 plus mine abandonment plans that we hold here at the Coal Authority, unrecorded mine entries are being found all the time, and we'll come on to how new information is added into the database later on in the webinar, so we'll park that one for now. With the way the UK is populated, we also know that around 7 million properties sit within the coalfield, 130,000 of which lie within 20 metres of at least one mine entry. So this clearly means that mining legacy is something millions of people need to be aware of throughout the UK. So all that sounds really dramatic, but what does it actually mean in real terms? Well, it means we handle upwards of 600 surface hazards and 500 subsidence claims each year, all as part of our statutory obligations. And of course, all of this has an impact on the public in some shape or form. Alongside all of that, again, under our statutory responsibilities, we're also dealing with upwards of 7,500 planning applications each year to ensure that mining legacy remains a focus and that the correct investigations and considerations are being taken. So what does all that mean? It means that coal mining legacy is very much alive and kicking and will continue to be in various forms well into the future. Now, as a kind of more relevant example for today's concerned, climate change is a big consideration these days, as it's increasing rainfall in many areas of the coalfield, which is not only helping to speed up the rate at which underground workings are filling, but it's also contributing to the dissolving of support strata, which is then in turn, of course, revealing more and more unrecorded activity. And all of this means we're continually having to deal with a very dynamic situation. Okay, so let's take a look at how you support your clients by doing the right risk assessments. As with anything like this, planning guidance drives what requirements need to be considered when looking at things like risk assessments. And under our statutory responsibilities, the Coal Authority derives this focus for coal mining risk assessments. As part of this, there'll be a key requirement for detailed geological profiling to be conducted to ensure all mining hazards within an area are identified. Now, of course, upon doing this, it will call out exactly what considerations need to be taken with the site and then in turn determine the potential layout of a particular development. This then equally has an impact on the project's viability for your clients. These sorts of situations also bring with them a certain level of complexity, and this always means a risk of exposure to indemnity and, of course, reputational risk. The way to obviously avoid any of that is to ensure that you understand exactly what you're dealing with on site for effectively using the data that's available to you. But of course, the big question remains, will all of this address the planning requirements that are set out? Moving on to the likes of commercial drivers, but still under the note of compliance, ensuring a full site characterisation is conducted goes some way to reducing the likes of indemnity risks. And as for commercial drivers, ensuring efficient workflows and processes are in place will, of course, support good margins and, in turn, competitive rates in what is quite clearly a very competitive market. And as with any industry, repeat business is key to commercial success, and it's not rocket science when people call out that satisfied, well-informed clients means retained clients. Now, let's start to tie some of this up and look at the research side of things behind all of this and ultimately start to focus on one of the reasons we're here today. Now, during 2017, a team of people here at the Coal Authority, myself included in that, spent a number of months speaking to the likes of yourselves to understand exactly how you're currently conducting your risk assessments, and in particular, what information you gathered and where the pinch points were within your processes and that information you were trying to get hold of. What this research highlighted quite early on was that, as we expected, you all have your own approaches to each part of the process surrounding risk assessment production. So, sounds obvious though, right? Now, we know you guys are the experts in your field, and backed up by our research, we're also aware that every single one of you will take a slightly different approach when conducting your risk assessments, but we still spotted that there are some very close similarities in how you're doing this, such as sourcing the likes of BGS maps, using the Coal Authority's interactive viewer, and gathering any information available on past SI. But the big one on top of all that was just quite simply your experience and your knowledge and your expertise in the field. So once you've then gathered all that information and data you require, the other similarity is that all of this then helps you to inform your SI strategies and in turn any proposed site layouts for your clients. And then all of this combined then starts to form part of the planning submission. So what is all this getting at? Well, in short, it's become apparent that the Coal Authority had the ability to support you with additional data compared to what we were already doing through people using the likes of the CON29M report, and equally allowing us to display it the way you would want to see it. So that covers off the foundations for today's webinar. Now I'm going to pass you over to my colleagues and they will spend some time talking you through a real-life case study to demonstrate some of the exciting work that we're involved here at the Coal Authority. So we'll kickstart things off by passing you over to Andy Moritz.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I suppose the primary question is, what is a mine water treatment scheme? Well, a mine water treatment scheme is an asset that we've been heavily involved in building and operating for the last 20 years, and they treat mine water. It's the environmental aspect of managing our mining legacy and the preventing iron pollution in rivers and aquifers. Why do we need them? We need them to comply with the Water Framework Directive, and we've got the 2027 target to ensure that all our watercourses are in good ecological status and we've got no deterioration from the current position. And that's likely not to change, or we don't expect that to change with the Brexit bill going to enact and transfer and transpose all European legislation into British legislation. We're currently doing that on behalf of two government departments. Firstly, the coal mining side of the business is looking after the mining pollution for BEIS, Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and we're also doing similar works for the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs on metal mines. And as a result, basically the schemes fall into two different categories. We operate 75 at the moment. Out of those 75, 65 of them are remedial schemes and 10 are preventative schemes. So the preventative schemes are, as they would expect, presenting and preventing something that may happen in the future. Those 75 schemes are part of an overarching programme of around about 120 to 125 schemes that we're dealing with on a prioritised basis. And we're looking at the cost benefit, and if the cost benefit doesn't stack up, unfortunately, some of the schemes we think we won't be able to deliver. So that's constantly being revised based upon information we've got and some of the data we're gathering. Schemes fall into 5 different operating profiles. We have the very complex industrial process type scheme, through active chemical addition, through pumped schemes where we're having to manage geography and get water to an area where we can actually treat it. But wherever possible, we try to do these on a passive basis, utilising the topography of the land to get the water from the discharge point into an area where we can treat it before it enters the watercourse. We'll go into how we actually do it in a little bit more detail later on, but primarily we're looking at aeration to get some oxygen into the water via a cascade. The initial settlement is done through large lagoons, and then the polishing, the final cleaning is done in reed beds. To put it into some sort of context, we're spending around £9 million a year on revenue spend operating these schemes, and we're looking at around about 6 to 14 million pounds over the next few years actually building the schemes. Interesting work that we're doing that may be of interest to yourself or some of your potential clients. One of the options and potentials we've got moving forward is actually exploiting the heat that's in the mine water. The mine water comes out of the ground at around about 15, 16 degrees C on occasion, and there's potential for heat exchange systems in community function, community buildings, etc., or housing developments. There's also the grey water side of things from a potential use from industry. And actually the ochre we produce has significant benefits from a land remediation point of view, fixing in heavy metals and poisonous metals in the ground when people are looking at development of old factory sites and things like that. To take you a bit further on and look at some of the key facts that related to our scoping study that we're looking at the moment, I'll pass you on to our colleague, Dr. Ian Watson, who will take you through some of the key interesting points that develop the scheme.
Thank you, Andy. Good morning. So, as Andy says, our case study today is a site we call Sheep House Wood. This is located near Stocksbridge, just north of Sheffield in Yorkshire. Just off the route of the Woodhead Pass, which at this time of year often closed by snow. Works commenced 6 years ago, February 2012, and it's of the type pumped and also passive. Looking back into some of the background history, the colliery was called the Handbank Colliery, and it last worked many, many decades ago in the 1930s. And the minerals extracted, there was coal and fire clay extracted from this mine. It's in the catchment of the Little Don, which feeds into the Don itself. So thinking about the background, some 20 years ago, back in the late 1990s, this site was a part of the newly formed priority list that the Environment Agency made, where all of the mine water discharges across the English area, there's a similar list in Wales and Scotland, but in the English area were put together and ranked and prioritised. So Sheep House Wood featured on there. That's shown in the photo there with its location just by the highway. So unfortunately, we just got the very first thoughts about what we might do about it. And then in 2002, there was a very dramatic event. There was a sudden outburst from the adit, or what we call a blowout. So in the photo, you can see that there was an awful lot of ochreous, iron-rich mine water suddenly came out over a space of a few hours, accompanied by lots of mud, debris, rocks, pit props from the mine. This actually caused the road to be closed for a couple of days, and our public safety team were heavily involved in the sort of clear up and getting that immediately fixed up. But we wanted to put in a bit of a remediation in case there was a recurrence of another blowout happening. So the first thing that was done is putting in some very large diameter pipes underneath the highway, such that if there was a new blowout, then the water would be channeled under the road rather than going across it and causing it to have to be closed. But they wanted to do a longer term fix as well. So what was decided was the best approach would be to get just inside the mouth of the adit, which you can see photographed here, and then construct first some walls and then inject some concrete into the space near the mouth of the adit to really stop the possibility of any really large outburst happening again. So the concrete, to gain safe access, we first had to pump down the water in the mine. So a borehole was put in and generators used and temporary pumps. Water was pumped down and then the access was made safe, and then we're able to put this stopping in. We just had to put in a small pipe through for any residual mine water that was still flowing through. So thinking back about what we were going to do about the pollution aspect, the environmental aspect of this, the blowout had given us a rather interesting conundrum in that it had managed to change the location substantially of where the discharge was coming out. So in the past, the whole discharge had come out of the mouth of the adit, but following the blockage, the levels had built up and the water was now found to primarily emerge in a nearby wooded river valley, about 500 yards from the actual adit site and somewhat higher up the hillside as well. So this kind of changed the outlook on what could be done, what would be a feasible solution to treat the water. Essentially, we were having to look between two separate sites. One of them was down in the valley floor, just nearish to the adit mouth. And then the second site was looked at was much closer to the new discharge location and a little higher up the hillside in some fields. I'll now hand over to Jim to tell you in a bit more detail about the studies we went through.
Morning. Yes, so once the sort of initial scoping had been done and the sort of sites, possible options were sort of evaluated, we went on to a feasibility study, which is looking at sort of the pros and cons of both of these sites, and which one we'd move forward with, finally onto construction. So both sites, I mean, I think a lot of the time we're sort of constrained by where we can build things, which isn't a blank canvas. We're kind of building where the discharges are, which often isn't in the best place. So there's always some compromises. So the two sites, one was in the valley bottom. I think the GI from that, it was lots of sort of perch water, so the ground conditions weren't very good. It's also on a very busy road, so the access was very bad. And then there's a site higher up nearer the discharge on some farmland. So the drawback from that one was it was quite a long access in. So once all the evaluation was done, the higher site, the farmland site, was taken forward. This offered sort of less risk. So one of the first things we did was get the mining risk assessment done by our sort of in-house teams. So that flagged up a few things on the site. Obviously, we knew there's some mining there with all the issues we'd had in the past, and there was an outcrop sort of midway across the site, shallow workings. So the report we had done kind of identified sort of the issues that were on the site and sort of enabled us to sort of pinpoint the investigations a bit better. So what we did on this site was we did a series of trial trenches to expose the outcrop. So we did find it, improve it. And so then that enabled us to sort of plan the construction. So to sort of address those issues of potential shallow mining, we sort of overdug that area and recompacted it. There's also a number of sort of adits, and I think the discharge is probably coming out of one of the old adits and the one that fed down to the blowout. So part of the feasibility is we do an investment study. We have to get it signed off internally, see whether it stacks up. So we do a cost-benefit analysis, which sort of quantifies the impact of the watercourse. I think it's worth pointing out it does feed in. It's an impounding reservoir just down the river from this discharge. So we follow a streamlined process which is sort of based on Prince 2, which is sort of checkpoints and gateways. So this scheme, once we had it costed, it did stack up on the cost benefit. So the investment board signed it off and we moved on to the build stage. So it's just worth mentioning one of the other things, so there's a twofold. One is the remediating the environmental pollution, and the other is reducing the risk of a future blowout. By us pumping sort of behind the adit, it kind of reduces the risk. So as part of any of our schemes, there's sort of many sort of permissions we need to gain. There's permits from the Environment Agency for the discharge, planning. Some of the work can be undertaken under permitted development, which I think this was. There were some conditions, but it was permitted development. The big one is land, which we'll come on to, and then there's sort of designations. This site didn't have any specific environmental designations. There's a triple SI nearby, and there was some protected species on site, which we'll come on to. So while this is all going on, the permissions and the sort of the investment approval, we were progressing the land, which sometimes can be quite a lengthy and protracted process. We haven't, well, I think there are some permitted sort of compulsory purchase powers, but they're sort of quite onerous to use, and I think we tend to prefer to sort of with landowners' agreement to get the land, because obviously we're going to be there for a long time, so it's having sort of a positive relationship with our neighbours. So the land was secured. So we then did some site investigations. Again, we mentioned that a bit earlier. So boreholes had been carried out previously, so we didn't need as many trial pitting, which again was to confirm the outcrop. There's also a sandstone band, which we found at the bottom. That's outcropped, and that sort of turned into a bit of an opportunity, because we were able to crush the stone on site and use that for the roads, which saves us importing and getting rid of the sandstone. The site was also very wet, so there's quite a bit of work up front to sort of manage the water. So one aspect of the mine water, there's quite a lot of dissolved CO2 in it, which has the effect of lowering the pH, making it net acidic. So one of the things we need to do is to drive that off, which we do by, in this case, we built a lengthy discharge cascade. Was also considering whether we needed a RAP scheme, which is a reducing alkalinity producing system, something like that anyway, which basically uses compost and limestone to sort of chemically treat it. Don't ask me too much more. So it was borderline whether we needed one. We were looking at whether we could convert one of the lagoons to that in the future. So that's probably the way we were going. And some space was left if we needed one in the future again. So once we've been through all this, the solution was progressed, which involved building, I think it was 2 settlement lagoons and a reed bed, which Andy will come on to how this works in a bit. So the big enabling works for this one, it was access. As I say, it was about 600 metres long, a very sort of narrow and steep farm track, so we had to put some passing places in, and again the drainage. The site kind of helped us. It is quite a sloping site, which is good for the hydraulics and for the cut fill. So we were able to sort of dig out and then pile up and form the lagoons. So on site there was some protected species. There were some badgers that were living in some of the old workings, so they had to be managed. So we provided a new set for them. There's also some trees that had to be taken down, and obviously there's the sort of bat potential for those as well. So the specialist input on those and permissions from Natural England. One of the big challenges on this job, and quite a lot of our jobs, is power, getting power to our sites when we have to pump. I mean, the costs, the dramatic range that we have to pay. This one was a very long, we had to be powering 3-phase power for quite a way away. I think it was knocking on for a kilometre, so obviously it was quite expensive. There's also diversion of overheads across the site, because they're too low for us to use the machines underneath, so sort of securing the permissions for those took quite a while. So finally the build began. Working with the contractor, we looked at a few things. So the earthworks are amended. We had some reinforced banks that they managed to get rid of. It saved a bit of money, and again using the sandstone. It was a very wet winter from what I remember. We worked through the summer, we were a bit delayed, and then we were into the winter, and it was very wet, so that was a big challenge as well. So one of the things we did come across is one early on in the job was an unrecorded shaft, which was near the site access. I think they found an old stone and turned it over, and there was something underneath. So we had to get our engineers out to come and have a look. So working with the contractor, that was capped, but we left it in. I think it was infilled with large stones, so it was connected to the adit, so the flow went through below, and then a big concrete cap was put on top. Again, we just sort of mention that. So what we tend to do, and our current sort of framework, we've sort of developed standard details, which is trying to use sort of precast elements for a lot of the structures, like the inlet channels, the cascades. This is to try and get as much stuff as possible made off-site, and also try and do the same thing again and again. So we sort of get economies of scale, and also sort of the contractor from a safety point of view, there's less site works, and also they're sort of more familiar with the work they're doing. So the scheme was sort of built using those sort of pieces. On this site we had space to stockpile, which is often a big issue, particularly when it's wet. But thankfully we had space to do that. So following all of that, the project was completed in December 2013. So it took quite a while to get there. Again, there's a few delays with ground and power and the like. I think Andy's going to run through the rest of it.
Cheers, Jim. If you look at the slide that's currently on the screen at the moment, it's sort of a basic layout of what the scheme actually turned out to be. Top right-hand corner, the mine water enters the system from the pump station, runs through a cascade, and a fairly lengthy cascade, as Jim's mentioned. The purpose of the cascade to drive off the temporary acidity caused by the dissolved carbon dioxide. Then runs into two large settlement lagoons, where primarily that's where the majority of the iron falls out, and then across into the bottom left-hand corner, where it goes through the polishing reed beds and then out through the channel. From our point of view, from an operational point of view, nothing should come as a surprise to us, because we're quite involved in the discussions as regards scheme design, feeding in best practice, lessons learned, health and safety requirements and things like that. So we work very closely with our colleagues in the projects team. From a handover point of view, it starts off with walkovers, site inductions, so the construction team will take the operators and ourselves as operating managers around the scheme, looking at what the scheme is, looking at how the scheme operates, anything that's of a site-specific nature, training on operations of panels and equipment, etc., etc. Backing up all this, the operation and maintenance manuals and the health and safety files, which we review to make sure they contain all the appropriate documentation. Once we're happy with that, and we've gone through the usual sort of snagging lists and things like that, the scheme's formally signed off and becomes an operational asset for the Coal Authority. Sort of, I've already covered a little bit of the handover, and the photograph there shows some of the guys actually out on site looking over the scheme. General maintenance includes, as you'd expect, general housekeeping, health and safety type works, keeping channels free from debris, looking at the quality and condition of the reed beds. But we also, a big key part of it for us is monitoring the reed bed condition and the lagoon for levels of ochre deposition in them. We do that through water quality monitoring on the inlets and outlets of the lagoons, and we're looking there to see and make sure that the deposition of ochre in the lagoons doesn't impact the treatment performance. And we look at somewhere like this, and this all feeds into modification of our inspection regimes if we're getting more deposition than we would normally expect. So it is quite organic, and we'll treat each scheme on its individual performance and its individual risk rating. To put it in some sort of context, out of the 8.9 million I mentioned earlier on, somewhere like Sheep House Wood, it costs us about £1,000 a week to operate, all in staffing costs. So you're looking at £51,000 a year. And as I say, that covers staff, general maintenance, and electricity. We've already discussed the extra long cascade, and that's been a real success for us. Normally, we would have to put some sort of, if we had a smaller land footprint, we'd have to put some sort of chemical addition into that to mitigate that, and it's worked really well for us. So that's reduced overall cost benefit on the scheme, made it more attractive for us. If we're looking at iron loadings, to put it in some sort of context, the iron loadings on the scheme can be anything up to 17 kilograms a day that the scheme can remove, and 80% of that falls out in the two lagoons. Lagoons are sized at, with two of them, at 1,300 square metres each, prior to it feeding it into the reed beds. We also, as I mentioned earlier on, have a drying bay on one side of the scheme, and that's a fairly cost-effective and low-tech solution to managing the ochre that we've mentioned already that builds up in the lagoons. And we can get anything down to about 30% dry solids by overpumping the wet sloppy stuff out of the bottom of the lagoon, leaving it in the drying bay for a number of months. And it ends up becoming something similar in consistency to a wet clay stroke plasticine. As I said, we remove sort of 17 kilograms of iron a day from Sheep House Wood. To put it into context, nationally we remove around 10,000 tonnes of wet sludge annually from our 75 schemes. That equates to about 6,000 tonnes of a dried material. And in that, there's around 4,500 tonnes of ferric oxides. Those ferric oxides are useful in cement pigmentation for cementitious products, ochre-based, that sort of terracotta-style colour that you might see around on buildings and the likes. Also, as I mentioned earlier on, for land remediation. And one thing that we're really keen to progress at the moment with the water companies is use of the ochre as a replacement for the ferric oxide that they're currently having to buy from a wastewater treatment point of view. As I mentioned, after the lagoons, the ochre transfers, or the water transfers into the reed beds. That polishes the water and gets it down from around about the sort of 3 milligrams a litre to anything less than 1 milligram per litre. The reed bed at Sheep House Wood is a similar size to the lagoons at around 1,300 square metres. But to put it into some sort of context from a national operation point of view, we currently manage at the 75 schemes we operate just over 340,000 square metres of reed bed. It makes us around the third or fourth largest reed bed owner in the country and manager. And to put the 1,300 square metres at Sheep House into some sort of context, our largest scheme is 50,000 square metres, and our largest reed bed on each single reed bed is 9,000 square metres. So from this scheme, actually, in the context of things, is actually fairly small, but actually delivers quite a big impact for its footprint. It's also worth pointing out that whilst we do this, because we're doing this on a water framework directive basis, all our discharges to watercourses are consented by the relevant regulatory authority, and the nature of the discharge consent is based upon the impact or the loading that the local watercourse can take, and it does vary from site to site, and it does vary based upon the future the future benefits that the river could bring, be it from a water quality, as Jim mentioned, there's a reservoir further downstream, but we have a lot of consents that are very tight based upon the fact that we get a lot of salmonids in the rivers. We do a lot of work on the River Tyne, the River Girvan, the River Wear, so there's quite a large environmental and ecosystem benefit to the schemes that we build. Lifespan, we're generally looking at around 25 years plus for the concrete parts of the the concrete infrastructure, 10 to 15 years for the electrical. An average de-sludge would probably be around about the 5 to 6 years, and the rebed life, we're looking at between the 10 and 15 years. If you take the whole capital refurbishment and operating cost of the scheme, annualised, we're looking at around about an equivalent of about £200,000 a year investment, and that feeds into our monitoring of the scheme conditions. Performance feeds into our future programme and our future ask for government. I hope that's been interesting and useful for you. I'll now pass over to Andrew to take you through more on the consultants mining report.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, guys. There was a lot of content and information and sort of technical detail discussed there. So if anybody's got any particular questions around any of the information in the case study, do throw them into the question bar on the screen. And as I say, we'll gather them all up and we'll look to respond to that in the way of an FAQ document once the webinar's been completed. Okay, so now we're going to move on to talking about the new Consultants Coal Mining Report. So the new Consultants Coal Mining Report was launched in November last year following several months of in-depth research and has ultimately been designed by environmental consultants and geotechnical engineers. Because of this, it's been specifically designed to provide all the essential data and guidance on historical coal mining activity. And importantly, from your perspectives, it's been designed to call out any potential issues that could affect the site that you're assessing and equally the surrounding areas also. As a high-level overview of what's actually included in the new report, you can expect to see information and data around recorded and probable mining activity, information about coal mining-related geology to consider, details of coal authority managed colliery tips within the area, the locations of any investigations and remedial activities, the same again for licensing and future mining activity, and then off the back of the case study, one of the most exciting new additions is the locational information around mine water treatment schemes within the area. Now, the report itself is split up into 5 sections, and we'll come on to those in a second. But throughout the report, you'll be supplied with a much higher level of detail of information around coal seams, SI, remedial activity, subsidence claims, etc. And you'll also then get the addition of mine gas, mine water, and a much more detailed map showing all of the data as features in proximity to the site that you're looking at. You'll also get access to the catalogue reference numbers for any abandoned mine plans that are called out as being within or near to the site too. And all of this will then be finished off with tailored guidance based on the risks called out to then help support your next steps. So on to section 1 of 5 of the report, which is all based around mining activity and geology. Now, as the title suggests, section 1 focuses purely on past mining activity and coal mining related geology. So within section 1, you can expect to see tabular-based responses to past underground mining, probable shallow workings and spine roadways, recorded mine entries, and this will be both shafts and adits, abandoned mine plan reference numbers, outcrops, and the likes of mine tips. And then some of these, along with other key data sets throughout the report, will then be clearly displayed on the detailed map that will come as part of the report package itself. Section 2 moves on to investigative and remedial activities. In this section, again, in tabular form, you'll receive data on any SI and remedial activities that we're aware of as having taken place within the area, as well as the locations of any mine gas hazards, sites and mine water treatment schemes. In addition to these, you'll also get comprehensive information of any subsidence claims, and this will be regardless as to whether anything was accepted, rejected, or whether it's still being determined. And you'll get all this information within the zone around your site. Section 3 moves on to future activity, including licensing. And this section is going to give you information and considerations around future activity within the area, allowing you and your client to bear this information in mind when deciding your next steps. Section 4 is then where the tailored support comes into play. And within Section 4, depending on the responses you've received throughout all of the individual data sets within the report, certain guidance and recommendations will then be called out. This is designed to then ensure that you have all of the relevant considerations drawn to your attention and the attention of your clients right at the start of the process, giving you the ability to conduct further investigations if and when required. The fifth and final section is then simply the data definitions of the information within the report itself. And again, as the title suggests, it's simply designed to ensure that you're fully aware of exactly what data is reviewed within each response throughout the report, so you can be sure on exactly what information is being returned to you. So that concludes the sort of whistle-stop tour of the new consultant's coal mining report itself. What we're going to do now is show you how the considerations within the site discussed during today's case study location are called out in the new report. We'll also take a look at how this information is displayed differently between the new consultant's report and the Con29M, which we know is the more commonly used report at the moment. Starting with the Con29M, you can see on screen the 15 Law Society approved questions that are responded to when a non-residential Con29M report is requested for a particular location. And as I say, it's this particular report which we know is more commonly used for the sort of purposes that the likes of yourselves would gain information on at the moment. Then at the bottom of that table, you can then see further recommended reports that are called out based on the positive responses to the above Law Society questions. When looking at the detail within the actual Con29M, all the information is responded to in a textual format, meaning it gives a property conveyancer all the information they require to ensure that they're acting correctly on both the behalf of their client and the lender that's involved in the transaction. What this means, though, however, is that it's only realistically the minimum amount of information required, which is shown to ensure that actually all people involved have that information they need to be able to proceed with a property transaction. The easiest way of calling this out is when we look at the seam information returned in question 1. So in the Con29M, it simply says 2 seams are recorded from shallow to 290 metres deep. But of course, what that doesn't tell the likes of yourselves is what depth is the shallow seam and how many panels are then included within each of those. In the same sort of way, only the basic details surrounding mine entries are responded to in the Con29M, with just enough information called out to satisfy the conveyancer's due diligence. So without starting to sound like a broken record and stating the obvious, you can see how the same remains true for the rest of the responses throughout the report. And just for the record, it's worth noting that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the Con29M in any shape or form, nor the information it's supplying. All I'm simply trying to do is demonstrate how limited the information is, given the nature of what it's ultimately designed to do. So then finishing up with the Con29M, the supporting map shows the proximity of the key considerations to a property conveyancer, and those considerations being mine entries, so again both shafts and adits, subsidence claims, and then in some cases licence areas. Now we're going to take a look at the exact same site, so again the Sheep House Wood location that we looked at in the case study, and we'll then look to see how the information is then demonstrated within the new consultant's coal mining report, starting with past activity. Here you can see instantly the level of additional detail that's supplied as standard, allowing you to draw a much more educated view of the site that you're assessing. So for example, you can see both the seams are called out that were mentioned in the Con29M, but this time they're split into individual panels showing the depths, etc. for each one. So it's fair to say that then having all this additional information compared to the detail in the Con29M is clearly going to help speed up your processes in-house. The story is then the same when we get to the mine entry section, where you receive a much deeper level of tabular information and data on each of the individual mine entries themselves. Then with outcrops, this is something that isn't actually supplied in the Con 29M full stop. So it's clearly an addition that will support your investigations and characterisation of the site itself. And again, you can see that all of the information we hold for each of the outcrops is displayed in a tabular format ready for you. Same goes for the locations of any remediated sites in proximity to your particular inquiry boundary. And in this section, you can see that the report calls out that these positive responses can be viewed on the supporting map also. What it will also then call out is that additional information and guidance is available within section 4 in relation to the responses in this data set. Following on from that, you can then see the level of guidance and recommendations that are called out. So it's worth noting that you will only ever see statements here that are relevant to the responses you've received in the report, helping you to understand exactly what your next steps could or should look like. It's also worth calling out that if you have any further questions about any of the information in the report or the guidance that's called out here, then you can contact one of the team directly using the contact details shown at the bottom of the report itself. And then to finish up, before we move on to the map, of course, given the location we're looking at, you would also see some additional guidance on mine water treatment schemes too. Finally, then moving on to the map, you can see instantly the difference in the level of detail that you could expect to see. So basically, instead of just mine entries and subsidence claims showing as features on the map, you could expect to see up to 14 different features displayed based on the report, the positive responses within the report itself. And, you know, it's a no-brainer to say that this will clearly help you to understand the challenges that a site may present better, and then helping you to then use the information within your own risk assessments as well. So I've covered off a lot of ground when we compare the same site across both the new consultants coal mining report and the Con 29M, but why is this comparison important? Well, it's important because if we think back to the research I mentioned at the start, we know that the Con 29M is very much the report of choice at the moment when you're gathering mining information from the likes of the Coal Authority. Now, whilst this gives you a basic level of mining information and helps you to focus your investigations, the Con 29M was only ever designed to support property transactions with it following the agreed Law Society approved questions. For that purpose, the Con 29M works incredibly well and, you know, should always be the report of choice. And it's then ensuring that property conveyancers have all the information they need to successfully handle a property transaction. But for the likes of yourselves and what you do, it's simply not the right report for the job and is missing some really key information. And you can see from the comparing of the two reports that we've just been through, clearly the consultant's report gives you a much deeper level of detail, which, let's be honest, is key to the goals that you'll have in mind when seeking out the mining information in the first place. And again, thinking back to the commercial drivers we spoke about also at the start, by using a report designed for supporting property transactions, is simply creating more work for you and as such, more cost. So that's the bulk of the learning objectives that we spoke about at the start now covered off. What I'm going to do now, though, is give you a little bit of background around the data itself. As I mentioned at the start of this webinar, new information is coming to light every day, whether that be in the way of unrecorded activity being unearthed or remediated groundworks taking place. And this information needs to be managed. So, for example, the unrecorded mine shaft collapse that the guys spoke about in the case study. We do that by having a team of expert mining information managers on site who manage our databases to ensure that all the new information is loaded in at the earliest opportunity. So this means you'll always receive the most up-to-date information available within the market within your report. Yes, coal information is available out there in the market through other providers, but clearly we're the only coal authority. And everything we do here and the information we make available to you is backed by the heritage that can only come from the coal authority. And that's a key thing to remember with anything like this. So now a bit of summarising of some of the key facts that we've been over. So yes, the Con 29M has been around for years, and yes, it's incredibly good at what it does and what it's designed for, but the Consultant's Coal Mining Report is specifically designed to support land development and the likes of increasing existing property footprints and so forth, and is most definitely the report that you should be looking to when gathering your information to support the likes of risk assessments. It's also designed to ensure that all areas of consideration within the planning process are equally called out. As I just mentioned, It will always include the most up-to-date and accurate information available out there, and the reports can be ordered through our online ordering portal in the same way that you would do anything else, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And again, as you'll know, the reports themselves will return back to you within minutes. There's also free after-sales service available with these, and our team of experts are on hand to assist and answer any questions that you might have about the information supplied, or equally, the guidance of any next steps. So again, just to finish off, the report itself is designed to support you and your clients' needs, and we're here to support you above and beyond the report, whatever your needs. Our experts are always on hand to help out wherever they can. If you'd like more information or would like to download the likes of a product card or view a sample report in more detail, all of this is available on our dedicated website, and you can see the address of the website on screen along with the rest of the details for the Coal Authority itself. And there we go. That's us done for today. So thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope it was useful and of interest, and a big thank you to the experts for their part within the case study. There will be a short survey that will be sent to you after the webinar, so I would encourage you to pass us any feedback on the content, the delivery, and anything around the the consultant's coal mining report itself. As I mentioned at the start, we've been gathering your questions throughout today's webinar, and we'll look to supply all of these with responses in the way of a handy FAQ document, which I'll send out as soon as we've been able to gather all the responses to the questions. If you have any other questions or comments, or you'd like to contact me directly, my contact details are up on the top right-hand part of the screen. And back to the conversation around the recording, a recorded version of this webinar will be made available out on our YouTube channel within the next couple of days if there's anything else that you'd like to revisit. One more final thing before I let you go is around CPD accreditation. So this webinar has been fully certified by CPD UK, and you can see the certificate number on your screen if you'd like to take a note of this for your own sort of learning objectives. That's it. So thank you very much for listening to us today, and yeah, have a great afternoon. Thank you.